Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to welcome you to Social Work Hub. This is a platform where we bring you deep insight into contemporary issues in social work practice. We'll continue with our series on Introduction to Field Work Practice, and today we'll be talking about the topic of situational learning objectives, and professional behavior in field of practice. Um, in a way of an overview, um, field education is designed to move students beyond the acquisition of theoretical knowledge towards the development of practical competencies. Students learn not only from lectures and textbooks, but also from direct interaction with clients, social workers, agencies, communities, and supervisors, and also real social problems. This form of learning requires students to understand how to learn from situations, establish clear learning objectives, conduct themselves professionally, communicate effectively, and protect clients through confidentiality and appropriate professional boundaries. Now, this lecture will examine situational learning, adult and experiential learning theories, learning contracts, smart objectives, professional values and ethics, professional appearances and conduct, communication and interpersonal skills, confidentiality and professional boundaries. Now, like I said earlier in the introduction, the concept of situational learning is more like learning on the job. The social work student is being placed in an agency where he learns through practical experiences. He's going to interact with real clients. He's going to interact with professionals in the field, agency supervisors. So with that, it is going to acquire a lot of experiential learning and a lot of situational learning. Um, as a student during my undergraduate days, I was able to, I was posted to a community uh, called Amoka Community in the Nsukka local government area of Enugu State, Nigeria, where I handled one of my fieldwork placements. I was able to, through assessment, identify that the community has a challenge of drinkable water. And there was a pipe-borne water which was um, is available, but it's moribund. It's no longer in use. It's broken. So I had to communicate with the local government and liaise with the community to restore water and put a new pipe-borne water. So I was a student then, but I learned through practical means, experiential learning. And through that, I understood that social work students can do a lot. They can cause change. They can bring about development in a community, in an agency such as hospital, um, schools, and all of that. So we'll move right into the lectures. So, what is situational learning? Situational learning refers to learning that occurs through participation in real life situations, activities, relationships, and environment, rather than learning only through abstract classroom instructions. Students acquire knowledge and skills by actively engaging with actual situations. Now, in social work education, situation learning occurs when students encounter real clients, families, groups, communities, organizations, and social problems, and use these situations as opportunities for learning. For example, a student may learn about child neglect in the classroom. During field work placement, the student may encounter a family where a child frequently misses schools, lacks adequate um, food, and receives little personal supervision, little parental supervisions. The real situation provides an opportunity for the student to understand how child neglect manifests in practice and how a social worker assesses and responds to it. Now, there are characteristics of situational learning, and they include context specific. So situational learning are context specific. So it means you are placed in an organization. It could be a community. It could be a family setting. Then it is experiential. You are going to be in the field, make your observations, interact with the active participant. Then it's also active rather than passive. You are in the picture. It's socially interactive. Remember, we are talking about the characteristics of situational learning. Pardon. It has problem oriented, it's problem oriented. So you are in that very community to solve problem. It's connect it's connected to actual professional practice. Okay, we can also ask what is the importance of situational learning in field of practice? We will say the one of the importance of situational learning in field of practice is that it connects theory with reality. You have been taught in class, you then need to go to the field to experience what it's like to solve a particular problem. So situational learning helps the student to witness real life experiences. Number two importance is that it develops problem solving skills. From solving the problems of your client in the field, you are able to develop skills. Number three, develop professional judgment. When you interact with your client, solve problem um, severally, it will give you a sense of professional judgment. You have a professional judgment. You can be able to make decisions in the family cases. You can be able to make decisions in the hospital situations, maybe the hospital discharge plan, maybe rehabilitation cases. It from that situational learning, you can be able to make a professional judgment based on your experiences. The number four is that it helps you to understand organizational context. Remember, you are being placed in several agencies, so it will help you to understand agency policies, resources, procedures, professional relationships, influence practice. Now, number five, develop adaptability. Students learn to adjust their approaches to different clients and circumstances. So you can be able to adapt to several circumstances as, as a student. So when you are being placed in an agency in a real life situation, you can be able to adapt to several settings, several adverse situations that encounter through frequent practice. Now, number C is develop reflective practice. Student examines what happened, when it happened, how they could respond differently in the future. Reflective practice, where you sit down and ask questions. Why did this happen? How did it happen? How best to solve this problem? It's a reflection, reflective practice. So, so we look at adult and experiential learning theories. Adult and experiential learning theories. Adult learning theories, particularly the work of, so number one is adult learning theories. So these are theories that has to do with situational learning. So we termed it adult and experiential learning theory. So we'll start by talking about adult learning theories. We say that adult learning theories, particularly the work of Malcolm Knowles, it emphasizes that adults are active participants in their learning. Adults are active participants in their learning. The concept of andragogy, the concept of andragogy describes principles associated with adult learning. Adult tends to bring previous experience to learning. Adults, according to the works of Malcolm Knowles and the concept of andragogy, it says that adults tend to bring previous experience to learning. So, for example, when you are being placed into agencies, you went to agency one, through the experience you learned in agency one, you can be able to practice in agency two. And when you graduate, you can be able to practice effectively through the experiences you have learned. So, so it's this adult learning theory is trying to say that adults learn through participation. You know that when you are placed in your agencies, it's all about participation. You are participating in the process of day to day of that organization. You are learning about the client, how to solve their problem, the different problems that um, people, client encounter in a particular agency. And it's also so it also says that adults tend to want to understand why they need to learn something, why they need to learn something. And this theory also prefers relevant and practical learning. Now, what's the application of this adult learning theory to social work field work? What is the application? Now, social work students should not simply be passive recipients of instructions. Now, they should ask questions, identify learning needs, participate in decision making, and draw on previous experiences. So, we'll look at the second theory, second situational learning theory, or yeah. So, the second theory here is experiential learning theory. It was the other one is adult learning theory. This second one is experiential learning theory. Experiential learning theory, and it was propounded by David Cobbs. Cobbs. It says that experiential learning theory explains learning as a cyclical process involving experience and reflection. The experiential learning theory explains learning as a cyclical process involving experience and reflection. The cycle can be represented as is a cyclical. It can be represented as concrete experience. So people learn through concrete experience, just like you are placed in your agency. Then reflective observation. When you observe, you ask questions. Then abstract conceptualization. Abstract conceptualization and active experimentation. Now, we're going to handle them one after the other. The number one, we call it stage one. Stage one, which is titled is called concrete experience. Now, the learner encounters an actual situation. For example, a student participates in a home visit involving a family experiencing poverty. So, concrete example. So, so just like we said, according to this experiential learning theory, is a cyclical process. So that involves experience and reflection. So in this cyclical process, concrete experience is number one. The number two stage is reflective observation. You have encountered the situation, you reflect and ask yourself some questions. For example, student thinks critically about the experience. Questions may include, ask questions. Questions may include what happened? How did the family respond? How did I respond? What surprised me. What could have been handled differently? Now, number three stage is abstract conceptualization. The student connects the experience to theories and concepts. For example, the student may relate the family situation to ecological system theory, ecological system theories, poverty theory, strength perspectives. So we say that here the students connect the experience to theories and concepts. So you have encountered the situation, the concrete experience, you have reflected on it. Here you have what we call abstract conceptualization, where you try to relate the experience with the relevant theories you know about, such as ecological system theory, poverty theory, family system theory, and strength perspective. Number four is the active experimentation. Active experimentation. The student applies the new understanding to future situations. The student applies the new understanding to future situations. Okay, for example, during another home visit, the student may use improved communication and assessment techniques. Now, let's look at learning through reflection. Learning through reflection. Reflection is essential to field education. Reflection is essential to field education. Students should not simply record, I attended a visit. Students should also examine, what did I learn? What professional skills did I observe? Which theory applies? What ethical issues arose? How did my assumptions influence my interpretation? So, learning through reflection. So, when you are being placed in your agency, you try to reflect, you know, reflect on what occurred, what happened, what did you learn, how do you apply theories. So, it's a very major aspect of field work practice. So, um, most of the time in our client, in our environment, we don't usually talk about learning contract, but it is very important that there should be a learning contract, you know, which you can sign, that is signable, learning contract, which shows um, something that looks like it is the field doc pamphlet, which tells you what you are going to be expected to learn in the field, what you are expected to do in the field, and how you are going to relate with the agency supervisors, agency authorities. So it's more like it, but there is an official form that all the participants, both the student lecturers, need to look at and sign. It's called learning contract. Now, a learning contract is a formal agreement between a student, field instructor, and where appropriate, the university or faculty liaison that specifies what the student is expected to learn and how the learning will be achieved and assessed during field placement. Now, learning contract provides structure and direction for field education. Now, there is a purpose for learning contract. So let's look at the purpose for learning contract. So learning contract, number one, clarifies expectation. Through that learning contract, you know your expectation, you know what you're expected to do in the field. Now, it also identifies learning needs. What are the things that you need to learn? And it establishes measurable objectives. So, learning contract establishes measurable objectives. It identifies learning activities and defines responsibilities. It also provides a basis for supervision. Everybody knows the role of the student social workers. So it will provide the basis for supervision. It also supports evaluation. Now, there are major components of learning contract. There are major components of learning contract. So, number one component is student information. Student information. And this includes student's name, the programs, the level or the year of the student, the placement agency, placement period. Number two component of learning contract is learning need, where you specify the learning needs. The student identifies areas requiring development. For example, interviewing, assessment, case management, community mobilization, and documentation. Another component of learning contract is learning objectives. Learning objectives describes what the student should be able to accomplish. Another component of learning contract is learning activities. Activities through which objectives will be achieved. For example, observation, interviewing, home visits, case conferences, community meetings. Another component, the fifth component of learning contract is resources. Resources available to facilitate learning. What are the resources available? What are the mode of transportation to that agency of practice? So these are what you expected to see in the contract. Um, are there stipends involved? What are the logistics for transportation and all of that? Then another component of that learning contract is supervision. Specifically, frequency of supervision. What is the frequency of the supervision? What is supervision format? What is the person what is a person's responsibility? A person's responsibility. So, for example, in our client, in our environment, every week a supervisor, a lecturer goes to various agencies, and the students are not aware that the lecturer is coming to the agency to supervise, to find out if the student actually goes to those agencies or whether they just say that they are going to the agency and they abscond. So there is a frequent supervision. So the student will be made to understand there will be frequent supervision and assessment to identify how progress will be evaluated. So in that learning contract, assessment will be is part of it. Assessment. So we'll look at setting smart learning objectives. Setting smart learning objectives. Students should avoid vague objectives such as I want to become better at counseling. So, smart objectives. So, a strong objectives would be by the end of 8 week placement, I will conduct at least 5 supervised client interviews and demonstrate appropriate active listening, questioning, empathy, and professional documentation skills. So, in setting smart learning objectives, you are expected to outline an achievable goals, a measurable goals. So it is not just saying I will be better at counseling. It's not just enough. So we look at because we said setting smart learning objectives. So what is the meaning of that smart there? We say that S specifies the objectives. The objectives should okay. X is specific. S is specific. The objectives should clearly identify what the student intend to achieve. Specific, the objectives should clearly identify what the student intends to achieve. Be specific, that is smart, S in the. Then the M in the smart is measurable. The learning objectives should be measurable. Then the A in the smart is achievable. The objectives should be realistic with the student level and placement period. It must be achievable. The R there is relevant. The objective should contribute to professional social work practice and time bound. The T there is time bound. A specific time frame should be identified. So, so we look at professional values and ethics in during fieldwork. Professional values and ethics during fieldwork. Social work is a value-based profession. Students are therefore expected to demonstrate professional values from the beginning of their field education. Major professional values is major professional values in social work field practices. Respect for human dignity is the number one professional value in social work practice. So every person should be treated with respect, regardless of socioeconomic status, gender, age, disability, etc. Another professional value is service. Social workers have a professional commitment to help people address social difficulties and improve their well-being. Number three is social justice. Students should recognize and respond to discrimination, inequality, exclusion, and barriers to social services. The number fourth personal value is integrity. The number fourth personal value is integrity. Students should be honest and trustworthy. So they should not falsify records. I will give you a typical example. During the semester fieldwork placement, some students don't want to go to fieldwork. They stay at home. So during weekly fieldwork submission, fieldwork report submission, they falsify information, and that is not good. It is detrimental to your development as a student. You are not doing those. I, as a lecturer and other fieldwork supervisors, it's not us that you are deceiving. You are jeopardizing your ability to learn. So integrity as a student social worker is very important. So also look at competency. Students should practice within the limit of their knowledge and skills. Competency. Students should practice within the limit of their knowledge and skills. They should seek supervisions when they encounter situations beyond their competencies. Another personal value is respect for self determination. So, clients should be supported to participate in decisions affecting their lives, subject to relevant ethical and legal limitations. So, we have also cultural humility and responsiveness. Now, students should recognize different differences in culture, language, beliefs, family structures, etc. They should avoid imposing their personal values on clients. So, we also look at professional ethics during field work. Professional ethics during field work as a subject. Professional ethics during field work. Students should understand and follow professional ethics, professional code of ethics, agency policies, university field regulations, and relevant laws and regulations. So client rights. So ethical practice requires them to consider both what they can do and what they ought to do. So there are common ethical issues such as confidentiality. Common ethical issues, confidentiality. So, confidentiality, protecting client information from unauthorized disclosure, informed consent, ensuring client understand the nature and purpose of professional involvement. So, the informed consent, they have to take permission. They have to understand what they are, the process of the intervention. It shouldn't be something they don't understand. It must be with their consent. So, dual relationships, avoiding inappropriate relationship with client outside professional relationships. So, it's a common ethical issues, dual relationships. So, another one is conflict of interest. Avoid situations where personal interests interfere with professional responsibilities. Avoiding situations where personal interests interfere with professional responsibilities. So we have another one is professional competencies, seeking supervision when necessary. So we also look at professional appearance and conduct as a subject. Professional appearance and conduct. So during our weekly fieldwork visits in my school, we always tell students to dress properly, not to dress half naked. For example, we tell them when they go to prisons, we tell them not to dress seductive because there are sex offenders in the prisons. There are sex addicts in the prisons. As a matter of fact, the reason why they are the reason they are in the prison was because they violated women and all of that. So you being placed at a center as a student social worker, you're supposed to dress properly to avoid issues about harassment and seduction. Okay, so personal appearance and conduct is very important. So we say that professionalism extends beyond academic knowledge. Now, appropriate professional appearance. Students should dress appropriately for their placement environment. Professional appearance should be neat. Professional appearance should be neat, clean, appropriate to the agency, respectful for the community and client, consistent with agency expectation. Students should understand that dress expectation may differ between hospitals, schools, correctional institutions, corporate organizations. So, how you dress in this setting might not be the way you dress in another setting. So, how you dress in school might be different from how you dress in the hospitals or how you dress in the correctional institutions or in corporate organizations or even in the community settings. Community settings, maybe you're a practicing social worker and you are in a Muslim setting, a Muslim community. So you might need to put on hijab and some other costume that the Muslim people put on for you to be able, as a woman, for you to be able to access them. So how you dress is dependent on the setting. So we also have professional conduct expected of you as a student social worker. Um, and students should be one punctual. You should be punctual in your placement agency, even in class. Arrive at the placement agency on time. Be reliable. Complete assigned tasks responsibly. So two, be reliable. Number three, be respectful. Treat clients, supervisors, colleagues, and other professionals respectfully. Number four, be accountable. Be accountable. Take responsibilities for mistakes and seek appropriate guidance. Observe agency policies. So don't violate agency policies. So we are talking about professional conduct. So don't violate agency policies, okay? Now maintain appropriate relationships. Maintain appropriate relationships. Use social media responsibly. Use social media responsibly. So we tell you not when you go to your agency, don't just start, videoing your clients, posting them online. No, use social media responsibly. In some instances, you don't even need to bring out your phone to take photograph of or store information where it might be leaked. So we also look at communication and interpersonal skills. So what is the meaning of communication? Communication, for example, effective communication is fundamental to social work practice. So communication is the process through which information, feelings, ideas, and meaning are exchanged between individuals or groups. We have forms of communication. We have the verbal communication, which includes spoken words, questions, explanations, interviews. Then we have non-verbal communication, which includes facial expressions, eye contact, body posture, gestures, tone of voice, tone of voice, physical distance. So we have also written communication, case notes, reports, referral documents, emails. So we have essential communication skills, which is active listening skills. Um, Another one is empathy. Another one is open-ended questions. Another one is closed-ended questions. Another one is paraphrasing, summarizing, clarification. Now, there are interpersonal skills such as empathy, respect, patience, emotional regulation, cooperation. So, what is confidentiality? Confidentiality refers to the professional responsibility to protect information obtained from clients from, from unauthorized disclosure. Confidentiality refers to the professional responsibility to protect information obtained from clients from unauthorized disclosure. So clients have confidence that information shared with social workers will be handled responsibly. So confidential information may include medical information, family history, financial information, address and contact information, sexual and relationship information, psychological information, case histories, legal information. For example, this address and contact information, not only in social work, even banks practice confidentiality. I will give you a typical example. I had an issue whereby my landlord sold something. Is okay. Is this um what do they call them? Scrap dealers, those that go about the street collecting irons. They call them iron condemn. So they go about collecting scraps, collecting irons to sell to people. So my landlord took the chain I used to lock my motorcycle and sold to them. So and she doesn't know that iron condemn guy or those that sell scrap them that the guy that he sold my iron to. But he has the bank receipt that the guy transferred money to him. So I went to bank. That was Money Point. I went to Money Point and asked them that this is the transfer information. Can they give me the phone number of this iron condemned man or scrap man that sells scrap? They didn't give me that information about the contact of that guy. They told me that it's against their ethics. So every profession keeps confidentiality. So in social work, we cannot violate confidentiality. So there are importance of confidentiality. One is that it builds trust, it protects client dignity, it promotes honest communication, it protects privacy, it supports ethical practices, and reduces potential harm. There are limits to, to confidentiality. So confidentiality is important but not always absolute. So depending on applicable law, professional standards, and agency policies, disclosure may be required or permitted in circumstances involving serious risk of harm, child abuse and neglect, court orders, certain public health requirements, or other legal mandate reporting situations. So there are professional boundaries. What is professional boundaries? Professional boundaries are the limits that define appropriate relationships between social workers and clients. Professional boundaries are the limits that defines appropriate relationships between social workers and clients. Boundaries protect both clients and professionals. So there are boundaries that you must keep as a practitioner with your client. There are boundaries. Examples are maintain professional relationship. You shouldn't, okay, number two is avoid inappropriate and personal relationship. Avoid exploiting clients. Four, avoid unnecessary personal disclosures. Five, maintain appropriate physical boundaries. Six, maintain appropriate. Okay, six, avoid inappropriate gift or financial transactions. Seven, keep client information confidential. So these examples of boundaries, for example, you don't engage in sexual relationship with your clients. Ehen. So there are boundary violations, such as entering a romantic or sexual relationship with a client. These are boundary violations. Borrowing money from a client. You have a client, you go and borrow money from. It's boundary violation. Lending personal money to a client without appropriate professional authorization. Using clients for personal benefit. Sharing unnecessary personal information. These are boundary violations. Okay. So So in summary of this whole class, we handle some concepts. So the major concepts are situational learning, so that students learn from real practical situations. Another concept is experiential learning, so that students reflect on their experiences. Then learning contract. Students establish structured learning goals. There are learning contracts. Then we have smart objectives. Students define measurable outcomes. Smart objectives. Then we handle personal behavior. Also handle personal competencies. And in summary, we say that situational learning is an essential aspect of social work field education, because students develop professional competency by engaging with real life practice situations. Adult learning and experiential learning theories emphasizes that meaningful learning occurs when learners actively participate, reflect on their experiences, connect those experiences to actual knowledge, and apply their knowledge to new situations. So this the end of this class. Thank you for listening.